In this video, I'm going to discuss the difference between a flow-through dam and a storage dam. I'm going to use two examples from the state of Arkansas. One is going to be Murray Lock and Dam. That's the flow-through reservoir that's located on the Arkansas River in Little Rock. The other is going to be Greers Ferry Dam, which is the storage reservoir that's located on the Little Red River north of Little Rock. So what you're looking at here is Murray Lock and Dam. So as I pan to the left, you can see that to the left is upstream of Murray, and you can see the turbulence that's occurring downstream of Murray due to the inflow that's being passed through the dam. This is Greers Ferry Dam on the Little Red River, and one of the things that you can notice is that it's got a much larger height than Murray Dam, and that is what you would expect from a storage dam. You would expect a storage dam to have a greater height than a flow-through reservoir. So you might be wondering, how would you tell the difference between a flow-through and a storage reservoir? And one of the things you can do is just go to Google Maps or Google Earth and look at the channel that's both upstream and downstream of a structure. So in this case, this is Murray Lock and Dam, and it spans the entire Arkansas River. And if you look at the downstream channel and compare that to the upstream channel, you can see that there's not much difference in the size between the upstream and the downstream. The upstream is a little bit wider, but you don't see a significant difference, especially when you compare it to a true storage reservoir like Greers Ferry Dam, which is located right here. You can look at the channel that's downstream of Greers Ferry Dam and see that it's much smaller than the upstream portion, the portion that's been impounded by the dam. So you can see a much greater area. And it's not only that this main stem of the Little Red River has a much greater area, it's also the tributaries that flow into the lake. Now, these tributaries once flowed into the Little Red River, but now they flow into the lake, and they've also have gotten much wider, or they have much greater area. And a lot of times you'll hear these being termed as being arms of the lake. So now we're going to look at the inflow and release that's coming into Murray. And this is probably the best way to tell whether or not something is flow through. So this is for the year 2019. By the way, this is flow in cubic feet per second. And as the name would imply, if it's a flow through reservoir, you would think that any inflow that comes in is being passed through. And the red dots are the release. And you can see that it corresponds really well to the inflow. It might not be exact, but basically, any inflow that's coming into Murray is being passed through the dam. Now, with a storage reservoir like Greers Ferry, again, we're looking at 2019, you would expect some of that water to be stored. And in other videos, I go into what governs the operations of storage dams, so I won't go into detail about that. But ultimately, the difference between flow-through and storage is that you would not expect the inflow and the release to be the same for a storage reservoir. Some of the water that's stored is going to be used for drinking water. It can also be used to generate hydropower. And one of the reasons why we actually store water is because you may have flooding downstream. So if you have a significant amount of inflow coming in from upstream, then you want some or all of that to be stored to help to provide some relief from that downstream flooding. And that is one of the things that you can see in that February 2019 rise. You can see that most of that was captured. So we significantly reduced the amount of that inflow that was being passed downstream at that time period. So now I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about Murray Lock and Dam, and since it is a lock, you would expect that there is a lock chamber, which there is, and this is one of a series of locks that's along the Arkansas River, along the Arkansas River navigation system, and this system can actually take barge traffic all the way from the Mississippi River. So the Arkansas River has its mouth at the Mississippi River, so it terminates at the Mississippi River. And so it has a series of locks that can take barge traffic all the way from the Mississippi River into the state of Oklahoma and almost up to Tulsa, Oklahoma. So again, that's the lock chamber. And one interesting feature about this is that here you have the lock gate, and we know that to the left is upstream and to the right is downstream. One other way that you could tell that is you can look at the gate itself, because these gates, when they're in the closed position, they typically will point upstream, as this one is doing. Here you have the Tainter gates. This is one source of release, or one method of release that we use to pass water from upstream to downstream. And off in the distance, you can see that we have a hydropower plant. So again, that's another method for passing water through the dam. And in this case, we can generate hydropower. The hydropower that's generated at Murray is used by the people in the city of North Little Rock. So I wanted to look at the headwater, or the upstream elevation, and the tailwater, or the downstream elevation at Murray. So here we're looking at the headwater, and then this is the tailwater. So I wanted to point out a couple of items with the headwater and the tailwater. First, we do have a relatively constant headwater, and that is what you would want for navigation. We are trying to provide navigation depth for the navigation traffic on the Arkansas River, and so we do try to provide a constant headwater. However, during large rises, as you can see, we're not always able to hold that. We don't want to necessarily hold that. You can see also that we do have a head differential. It is what you would expect, because we are trying to keep the water up, again, to facilitate navigation. As a byproduct of doing that and creating that head differential, we are able to generate power. So in this case, I think where I'm showing it, that's probably maybe 15 feet of head differential. And head differential is just the difference between upstream and downstream. The tailwater will vary depending on how much flow is being passed through the dam. And you can see that when you get to higher elevations at Murray, that the headwater and tailwater come very close together. And that tells us two things. Number one, it tells us that we're not going to be generating any power during that time, because we just don't have the difference between the upstream and the downstream to drive those turbines to generate power. The other thing that it tells us is that the impact that Murray has that Murray Dam has on the reach that's upstream of the dam is going to be minimal, because we don't have much difference between the headwater and tailwater. And again, that tells us that Murray is not creating much of an impact during the high flows. You can look at Greers Ferry Dam headwater and tailwater also. So this is the headwater during the year 2019, and we can also look at the tailwater. So for headwater, again, this is a storage reservoir. So in some cases, you're going to be storing water. So where this arrow is pointing to, you have inflow that's greater than the release, so water is being stored at that time. And at this point in time, you have inflow being less than release, so it means that some of that stored water is being released. And if we look at the tailwater, this is showing during the year 2019, and it's showing during relatively normal times, meaning that at this time we don't have any spillway releases going on. And you can see that there's a very definitive range for the tailwater, and that range is showing full hydropower generation, meaning all the units are on and we're generating as much power as we can, all the way down to minimum power generation. So during normal times when we don't have spillway releases going on, we would expect for the tailwater to be somewhere in between those two elevations. So hopefully this video gave you some more insight into flow through versus storage reservoirs. If you're interested in the topic, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You get notifications when other videos come out. And thanks for watching this video.